Welcome to Corporate Therapy, the podcast where we unpack the dumb stuff businesses do. We ask the big juicy questions, why, what were they thinking, and then we chase down the answers. I'm Matt, your corporate plumber.
And I'm Rob, your leadership locksmith.
So today we're getting into a topic that sounds a heck of a lot sexy than it should be, which is the growth mindset. Now, I'm not talking about the Instagram I'm perfect version. I'm talking about the messy, sweaty, awkward reality of learning while failing in public. Now, Rob, I want to rip this Band-Aid off and just get straight into what the heck is a growth mindset, and is it just a fancy word for learning?
Interesting. I think it's a little bit more than just a fancy word for learning. It was made popular by Carol Dweck's book, Mindset, where she introduced the difference between the fixed mindset and the growth mindset. And to me, what the growth mindset is it's a behavior. It's a almost a way of looking at the world that makes it easier for you to deal with failure. And in dealing with failure, it makes it much, much easier to learn. Is that your take on it?
Well, to me, it's pretty much how you show up in the world. It's your attitude you bring to what you face. And I think the one clue that you gave me earlier, Rob, is when you talked about it's your belief that your potential is unlimitable, right? It's I'm sure that's a word. Well, it is now. Like
it is,
and it's got no ceiling, right? You believe that you can change over time, and that's the complete opposite of a fixed mindset. But then again, you're chatting to a person that felt nothing got better after the 1980s, and there wasn't anything worth learning.
Well, if we're talking about music, that's definitely true.
But I am keen. Like I do hear growth mindset come up time and time again when I either go to training programs, I walk into clients. Like, we need to have a growth mindset. Why is this all the rage?
I think it's a change in the way that we manage ourselves, that we manage other people. It's a change in the way that we lead both ourselves and others. It used to be that failure was a bad word. Failure was a horrible thing to have to ever experience. And success in business was what drove people into promotions and you know what, and ended them up in the corner office, you know?
Yeah.
But I think what we've started to realize is that human beings are trial and error creatures. It's not even that we need to be cooler with failing. It's that's the only way that we learn, you know? And I think we're starting to get our heads around that in a much better way. There's a couple of great little examples that I've stolen from other folks and I use in some of my training sessions. I ask people if they can drive a manual car. And I ask them, what was it like to learn to drive a manual car? And I get a couple of answers from the crew, but I basically tell them, if your experience was anything like mine, you were sitting in the passenger seat of the car, watching your dad drive the car and going, well, he can do it. How hard can it be? I'm 15, 16, so I know everything now, and he's old. So what would he know? How hard can it be? And then you get into the driver's seat and you're desperately trying to balance the clutch and the accelerator while you're in first gear, and you stall the car, or you bunny hop it down the road or something like that. But it doesn't go well, right? It never goes well. And you quickly move on to, this is tougher than I thought. Then you practice, usually in parking lots, so you don't kill anyone. And you've really got to concentrate on, okay, the revs are getting a little high. I need to come off the accelerator, push in the clutch, shift up to second gear. And after a bit of practice, you move on to stage 4, where you can do it. And it's as easy as walking or talking or running up credit card debt. It's just something we can do without even thinking about it, So what's interesting is, from a psychology perspective, you go through these 4 stages. You start off unconsciously incompetent. I don't know what I don't know. How hard can it be? If you ever hear somebody say, how hard can it be? They're unconsciously incompetent. Yeah. Then you stall the car, or you bunny hop it down the road, and you move on to stage 2. Now you're consciously incompetent. Bugger, this is harder than I thought. After a while, you move on to stage 3 after a lot of practice, where you're now consciously competent. I can do this, but I have to give it my full attention. If I get distracted, I'm going to grind a gear or I'm going to stall the car again. And eventually you move on to stage 4, where you're unconsciously competent. I can do this and I don't even have to think about it. Everything we learn, we go through those 4 stages. Sometimes it takes 20 seconds. Sometimes it takes 20 years. But the failure is a really, really important part of it. That step into conscious incompetence is really, really important. Think about it. If you somehow manage to perfectly drive the car off down the road on your first time and shift up into second and shift up into third, you'd end up massively overconfident. And with that massive overconfidence comes the chance that you're going to wrap the car around a lamppost or something bad is going to happen. That failure step is really important, that it allows us to give a new skill the concentration it deserves while we're learning it. So that's a really long way of saying failure is not just important, it's inevitable. It happens pretty much every time.
Now, I do feel for the audience there, I need to put a disclaimer in. When Rob says stall, right, it doesn't mean stole. I think this is an important distinction, even though he's Irish and stealing cars might go with the territory there. It's a stall he was trying to say.
Yes.
Excellent.
Damn Irish accent letting me down again.
But I think one of the things I'm quite interested, you touched on sort of that overconfidence, that ego, if you get it right the kind of first time. Where do you see ego kind of being the enemy to growth?
Well, I think, when people have early successes, and often those are just lucky successes, or they're unwilling to change, they'll double down on the thing that's worked for them before, or the thing that they consider a part of their approach.
Do you perhaps have some examples where you've seen ego at work fight against growth?
I do. You see it in execs in a lot of cases. So, for example, if you're trying to solve, and this is normal, if you're trying to solve the revenue stream of an organization, let's say, if you're trying to increase revenue, the sales guy is going to tell you it's all about increasing sales. The brand person is going to tell you it's all about getting advertising out there, and that's just because that's what they know. That's what's worked for them in the past. And they're not looking broadly enough to go, I might need to step over here. I think that's more common than we think, that we fall into our specialty and don't move outside it.
What about if you walk into an organization, you start to hang out with the teams, right? How do you spot those leaders that have got a fixed mindset, or those staff that have a fixed mindset, from those that are really willing to play in the growth space?
For me, the way I notice people that have a fixed mindset is that success is all that matters. They will do anything to push towards the goal that they've been given or the goal that they think is important. Whereas those with a growth mindset will be quite open to, this didn't work. Let's work out why and see what we can do differently next time. Yeah. It's more future focused rather than destination focused, if you like, or objective focused. A fixed mindset person will be like, we have to get to this number and we'll move heaven and earth to do it. Whereas a more growth mindset person will be, we're trying to get to this number. This isn't working at the moment. So let's see what we can learn from the fact that it didn't work so that we can do something different next time. It's always that do something different next time approach that leads me to believe that somebody's got a growth mindset going on. They're the sort of people that are into doing retros, into doing post-implementation reviews, that sort of stuff. It's learning from that failure so that they can move forward.
But being focused on achieving a result, are you saying that's a good thing, that's a bad thing, or is it the laser obsession with just going and not willing to change or adapt to achieve it? Help me understand that a bit more, Rob.
Yeah, so I think, obsession with an objective is a good thing, presuming it's the right objective, of course. Yeah. Most of the time, we've got that pretty well worked out. Most organizations have a customer objective and a people objective and a financials objective and, a couple of big hairy projects that they're working on. Those objectives are usually correct. The difference for me is that a fixed mindset person gets laser beam focused on that number and doesn't really care what they have to do to get there, or is prepared to double down on something that gave them success in the past. So to me, that fixed mindset has more of a, this is what worked for me in the past. Whereas the growth mindset is more around, what can we do differently in the future? And I think that's probably the key difference between the two as far as I'm concerned.
Love it. I want to change gears for a moment here, and sure. I want to reflect on those who've made the journey or the transition from being in a specialist role to taking on the first leadership or people leadership role. Why does learning feel so much harder in that leadership role than being in the specialist role? Or is that just me?
The thing What makes moving into a middle management role messy is that you don't get to focus on things anymore. You have to focus on people. Yeah. And people are messy, much messier than things. If you build a bridge the wrong way, it doesn't complain to you, Whereas if you lead a person the wrong way, you better brace yourself. So I think that's the big change, is that we're often promoted into management roles or leadership roles because we were very good at some sort of technical specialty. And they assume we're able to lead a group of people that have that technical specialty as well. So we find ourselves in a position where we've got to focus much more on the people than the stuff that we're doing. And people are significantly messier than things.
When you take on that role of needing to learn, you've kind of got both the people you are taking care of, looking after, but you're also reporting into somebody else, right? So you're also having to learn about their styles and their environment. What are some of the ways that middle managers can safely kind of navigate learning as a middle manager?
I'm not sure, Matt. I'd be interested in your take on this because I've been really lucky in my career in that most of my bosses were people that were very open to a conversation about learning, about failure. They were good coaches, good mentors. I haven't had that many folks that I would go, oh, my boss sucks here. Yeah. That said, I think if you have somebody who's open to the idea of you screwing stuff up while you learn, that makes it a much safer place to be. It's never a safe place to be because you're kind of learning in front of a live audience and they're seeing all of the screw ups that you make, whether that's your boss or your team. If you're new to this, you're going to make some mistakes. What I think you have to do is try to create an environment where those mistakes are okay, not just for your team, but for you, and for your boss, so that you can go, I tried something, I screwed it up. I want to learn about how to do it better next time around. I don't think that's ever going to feel completely safe. But if you've got a good boss and a good team, if you've been transparent about the fact that you're new to this and you might screw things up along the way and you'd love some feedback on how to do it better, I think that makes it significantly easier. What's your take on that?
Well, you talked about two conditions, good team, good boss, or at least 50% of that. I've had a mixture of bosses. Some absolutely fantastic. Others, I've learned what I don't want to be as a leader. Sure. And in those environments, it's a time when you grow up where failure is not an option. Like that's literally the language that was paid back to you. So the notion of stuffing up and that's okay because you're going to learn from it was like, that's fluff. That is soft woke crap. That's never going to enter our workplace if you want to stay employed. So in that environment where it's not psychologically safe, for me, it was about saying, well, where can I create pockets of safety? And so that was finding colleagues who are in a similar situation to me going, holy mother of Mary, this ain't safe. And I'm trying to learn stuff that I don't fully understand. So having people like being in a doctor's waiting room, right, where you're all in misery, but it's fantastic because you're all in misery. I mean, you could start to actually compare stories, what's working, what's not. So you were finding ways to level up your learning by sort of sharing the experiments you'd actually done, the failures you'd had quietly, very quietly amongst each other, and seeing what works. I think the other part was also having to find the laughter in the moments, right? Because you were such high stress, high environment, wasn't feeling, you needed a way for the stress valve to kind of come off. And I think the fact that you did want to succeed, you did want to achieve a great result for everybody, and there was the pressure, meant that, I don't know, madness had a wonderful way of creeping in, and I was very blessed with some of the colleagues I got to hang out with along the way. So for me, finding friends to share the pain and the laughter was probably the only survival technique I could talk about being in that type of environment.
Yeah, that's an important. Sorry, I cut you off there, Matt. No. What you've just mentioned there, I think, is really important. There's a concept called the circle of safety. When things are chaotic, that circle of safety shrinks, and when you've got an environment like the one you just described, that starts to expand over time. So, I advise leaders all the time to do exactly what you said, to create that little pocket of safety in their own team, and use that to start to influence the teams around you, and then eventually the organization and so on. I saw this in sharp relief. I was working for a cruise ship company. And I was doing some training on board. And a lot of the folks that work on board are from the Philippines or from India, from Vanuatu, places like that. And I said, tell me about what your first day on the ship was like. And they were like, we were terrified. We were going to leave our families for 6 months. We were in a new and weird environment. Didn't know what we were doing. And I'm like, who did you find? And somebody went, we found our people. And that's what happens. The Filipinos found the Filipinos, and the Indians found the Indians, and so on, because there was some safety there. These are people that share my culture, share my values. So I'm going to hang out with those because I'm freaking out at the moment. Yeah. But very quickly that expanded to, it's not just my people, it's my shipmates. So we're great on this ship, but those guys over there in that ship, they suck, And eventually that expanded again to the brand. I'm with this brand, so we're awesome, but those guys, they don't know what they're doing. And eventually again, that expands to the organization. But in times of chaos, that shrinks right back down again. So you're just like, I need to find my people. They're the ones I can trust. They're the ones that will make me feel safe in this chaotic environment.
And that's where I'd like to just probe a little bit deeper, because I think it's fair to say many organizations at the moment are feeling like this is a dumpster fire for us all. It is one where the wheels are absolutely falling off. I don't know which way's up. And the idea of, I need to spend more time learning, just seems like an insane move. What have you seen that keeps people being able to stay in the curious zone, even when that pressure is being applied or that uncertainty is kicking?
It's really tough to do, Matt. Really tough to do. When there's a dumpster fire, it doesn't matter what it is, that circle of safety shrinks.
Yeah.
And it can tend to leave us in a more fixed mindset approach. Even if we're growth mindset folks, usually, once that circle of safety shrinks, we tend to get fixed. The reason for it is we're trying to balance certainty and uncertainty. So when uncertainty flies up, you're trying to balance it by increasing your level of certainty. So you go back to the people to the approaches to the actions that you can take that have worked for you before. You're trying to feed in a little bit of certainty there. And when you're trying to feed in that bit of certainty, it's much, much easier for you to remain less curious, for you to use stuff that's worked for you in the past, for you to get past focused rather than future focused. To me, the antidote to that is just an awareness of it, an awareness of the fact that circle of safety shrinks, and to realize, okay, there's a chance I'm going to get more fixed here.
Yeah.
I need to start bringing a few rituals into my life that make me more curious, that make me go outside that little circle that I feel safe in. But that's a difficult thing to do.
I like that. I just want to pressure test that a bit now. How do you recognize when you're going into the fixed mindset? What are some of the red warning signs that you can keep watch of?
That's a good question. To me, that past focus is a big deal. I've done this before and it worked for me then, so I'm going to do it again. I think that's one of them. Realizing that your circle of safety has shrunk. This place is a dumpster fire, but my team are cool, which is a sort of an us and them kind of approach. When I feel the us and them kick in, that's when I realize I'm going into more fixed mode. I had a colleague at one point who we were on the same team together, and our boss said to him, what's with the us and them attitude? And he went, well, us'll stop with the attitude when them stop screwing up. And it was a great way for him to just acknowledge that actually that's what he was feeling, but do it with a bit of humor, So we all cracked up in the meeting, and he went, okay, I realize that's what I've been doing. How do we get around this? How do I get those folks back in again?
Yeah.
So to me, that us and them attitude is a big red flag.
Do you feel that if you look at the teams, the people you're caring for, when you can see that under pressure, it's a dumpster fire environment, and you're saying, we just need to try new things, and they're like screaming, we have no capacity, everything's feeling urgent. How do you help them find room to learn, space to learn? Any thoughts, any examples you've seen?
This is interesting because I've had this happen in an organization that I was in, where I was trying to make sure that my team was staying curious, that they were learning new things, that we weren't just doing stuff because it had worked before. And the organization was looking at a change of ownership at the time. And everybody was freaked out about their jobs. You know, what happens if we get sold to these guys and they decide we're not worth it and what have you? And I was thinking I was doing the right thing, trying to get people to stay curious and keep learning and blah, 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 until eventually one of them snapped at me in a meeting and just went, Rob, we don't know if we're going to have a job in 6 months. What's the point in learning new stuff if we're not going to be here? You know? And I was like, wow, I was completely oblivious to that, because that wasn't the way I operated. I was like, what will be, you know, let's just keep on keeping on. But I wasn't acknowledging the fact that they were under massive pressure, massive psychological pressure. And I wasn't doing anything to help by trying to be all sweetness and light when we were, it's like that, you know, the little meme with the dog in the fire. This is fine. Everything is fine. Yep. I was in everything is fine mode, and they were like, no, everything's not fine. And we need to acknowledge that. So I think one of the things that you need to do in a scenario like that is back off the learning for a little while. Okay. Or keep it micro at least. You don't want to be adding more uncertainty, which is what learning a new thing is, to an already uncertain environment. You want to be doing things that give people some manner of certainty where you can.
See, I see it perhaps a little bit differently. I think that's the most important time to learn. And the reason being is when you're going to go through an org restructure, or when there's an external threat, such as AI is going to come for our jobs, you have to start saying, how am I creating value? And how is it something that the market is actually going to have? Not the company for, it's the market. Is that something that values? Because the lead time it takes you to make sure the value you're creating and the time it then takes to find another job potentially at that point, or to secure the job you've got internally, is much longer, I think, than anyone gives credit for. The amount of people that I've seen take redundancies and then go, okay, I'm going to take a holiday or a break, and then I'll get into looking for jobs, only to find the market's not where they want it to be, and they're fantastic talent, and it's taking a long time. Yeah. So to me, the learning piece is around pausing and saying, is what I'm doing actually going to create value for this organization or externally? If not, where are the areas I feel I can play and need to learn to be able to create future value? Yeah, and I know that is scary. You're exhausted and you're stressed, but I guarantee you'll be more stressed if you're out of work and then trying to actually do the learning when you're out of work, begging for cash to come in the door.
No doubt. Yeah, I get where you're coming from there.
And I do feel for the folks that are saying, well, hold on, I'm in the redundant space. I am in the market right now, and I'm having to learn new things, and I feel really stressed because there's no income on the other side of this. The areas that I looked at is LinkedIn has some fantastic courses that are free. I think it's the ability for you to reach out to your network and say, do you mind? I just want to pick your brain. I want to understand what's happening in your, so you're staying relevant to the challenges and the opportunities. The last part, though, is you have to look at what skill sets may you need to round out that you really probably don't like, but where you see the market's potentially going. I mean, that's, if I look at designers as an example, most of them hate finance. It's like, those are the people that say, no, why would I possibly want to go hang out there? To me, those are the types of people you want to spend the most time really understanding their reality and their world, because it allows you to communicate far more effectively when working with senior leaders or trying to get business cases or trying to be able to demonstrate the benefits when you're in that next recruitment interview as well as to what you've delivered.
Absolutely.
But all this talk about being redundant or change and the need to learn means you've got to, I understand, or I've been told you need to be vulnerable. It's, of course, something I would never do at this point. And I'm wanting to know, is there a way to skip the vulnerability bit, if possible, Rob?
No, definitely not.
Well, this is a short podcast. Thanks for tuning in.
I think I get where you're coming from, right? And I get that vulnerability is massively uncomfortable a lot of the time. But again, you can look at that in a more positive light. One of the things I realized, you know, I spend the vast majority of my time standing in front of a room full of people trying to teach them new stuff. Yeah. And I find one of the best ways to teach people new stuff is to tell them a bloody good story. Yeah. Now, a story is great by itself, but what they really love is a story about you, about how you screwed something up, yeah, and what you learned from it. Yeah. And to me, that's the difference is you can see an awful lot of progress in vulnerability. If you can go, like I just told you about the time when I was trying to get my team to learn, but they were panicked about their jobs. I screwed something up. Yeah. But I learned from that, and I'm doing things differently because of it. And I think if you can focus on, but I learned from that and I'm doing things differently because of it, and I'm making more progress because of it, the vulnerability becomes a very, very small piece of the overall equation. It's like, I screwed this thing up. And yes, I have to be brave enough to talk about that in the open. But here's what I learned from it. And here's what I'm doing differently because of it. And here are the results that I'm getting because I'm doing things differently. And here's the success that has happened. It's kind of like when you're asked that horrible, well, you're probably not anymore, but when you used to be asked that horrible question in interviews, what would you consider your biggest weakness? There was a whole strategy on how you take that question and you turn that weakness into a strength. So I'm not tertiary qualified in a related field, but I'm currently studying a master's in blah, blah, blah. You were taking that weakness and turning it into a positive. I think that's the same thing when we're talking about vulnerability. Be open about the failure, but then focus on what we've learned, what's happening differently, what better results we're getting from it. Makes vulnerability much, much easier to put out into the universe and see what happens.
But vulnerability can also be weaponized, right? Because different people can say, hold on, Rob's just fessed up to something. I can use that against him. What guidance would you give around when to be vulnerable?
So I think you have to be vulnerable. I think you have to be careful about who you're being vulnerable with. I think anyone who is prepared to weaponize vulnerability, my guess would be they're going to fall into the toxic leader category fairly often, And I would temper my vulnerability around those people. I would certainly ask myself, is this something that could be used against me in the future? I don't mind being vulnerable. It's something I do on a pretty regular basis in front of a training room. But what I'm doing is telling people a story when I know none of them are ever going to be able to use it against me. None of them are going to think any less of me because I shared the story. In fact, most of them are going to think more of me because, Rob screws up like the rest of us. There's a common ground, a rapport building there. But I've had a couple of toxic bosses in my day, and I would not be sharing vulnerability stories with them, particularly if they had the tendency to weaponize it. I would also be questioning how I can set up an environment in which a person like that is not welcome. I think that's a horrible thing to do. And unfortunately, it's reasonably common in business. So we do have to pick our audience. But I think that's the case for a lot of the things that we do in business. We need to make sure that we can trust the audience we're dealing with.
So if we look at the audience being your team, people are reporting into you, how do you create the kind of culture where it's safe to just not know, right? You don't have the answers.
Yeah. Again, that's something I deal with quite regularly as a trainer. When somebody asks you a curveball question, you're like, I've no idea.
Yeah.
But I know a guy who does. So I'll call him at the lunch break and we'll deal with that later. Put a question in a parking lot, you deal with it later on. With a team, I think I approach it slightly differently. If somebody asks me about something where I have no idea whatsoever, I'll go, I haven't a clue. Let's work on that together. Let's see if we can come up with an answer together. I'll do this bit of research. You do that bit of research. We'll come back together. We'll share what we've worked out. And it becomes a learning opportunity then for both of us, So in a training room, I'm like, I don't know, but I'll find out. Whereas in a team, it's, I don't know. Let's find out together.
Okay. And on that note, then sucking sucks, right? Like it's one of those ones where that learning period, that early days where you got the training wheels on and you're like, this is no man's land. I so don't want to be here. Is there a way to accelerate getting out of the suck zone as quickly as possible?
Yeah, there is. There are a number of ways, and some of them will work better for others than some. I think making small steps, doing short little experiments is a great way to get out of that suck zone pretty quickly. Because progress is one of the best ways to shut down anxiety, pessimism, etc., even if it's just tiny, tiny little bits of progress. So I think if you can get yourself into a sort of an experimentation framework, we're going to try this and see what happens, even if it's just something small, quick, dirty, that makes a difference. Asking friends, colleagues, teammates for feedback and being genuinely open to hearing both the positives and negatives about the way you operate, and being prepared to try to amplify those positives and reduce the negatives in some way. I think those are the two that probably work best for me. What about you? How do you get out of the suck zone?
Well, I'm just clearing my desk here. I'm holding up now, pretty much it's a little A5 journal. For me, yes, I know it's old school, but it's the way that I write down all the stuff I don't know yet, right? And that's the important part, is the yet. That's right. I'm writing down the questions I've got that I really want to learn. And that helps me feel like I've got a to-do list that's quite structured. And so I write them in very small sort of micro tasks, similar to what you've talked about, those short experiments. And then I have a think about, where can I go to learn this? Like, who do I know that I can reach out to, tap on the shoulder and say, Rob, you've done this before. Can you walk me through it? Or, Will, can you show me how you built this before? Or, Amber, you've been in the coaching zone. Can you give me some feedback on this particular item so I know where to play? Having that visual, because I'm a very visual person in front of me, and having written it down, I actually feel more in control, even though I don't have the answers. Yeah. I know that might sound a little rational, but just visualizing, right, there's 20 questions I now need to go find the answers to. I will certainly have some assumptions around what I think the answers might be, but just the crossing out, I've done it, I've got the answer, is those moments for celebration. And perhaps I'm sadistic like that, but it's a moment of joy when I've found the answer. Brilliant, happy days. I have to be cautious, though, when using AI in this environment to finding the answers, because sometimes you think, oh, it's so easy, let's throw this into ChatGPT, and it will very quickly give you an answer. But if you have no context or no experience in this area, I have no idea if knowing that's right. Yes. And so for me, being able to make sure I've got different sources for answers and having them on tap to be able to reach out to is a really important part for speeding things up. And the rewarding small victories, I can't call that out strong enough. The crossing out, I found the answers, is because it's like a momentum wheel. For me, it absolutely helps you get that push to keep going. Like this, just yesterday, Rob, I think you were building a proposal and you were walking through the answers. And I think it was fair to say you're like, I'm not sure if this is quite hitting the mark.
Sure.
But the fact that we were bouncing it off each other, I found that liberating. I found we were finding the answers together was a faster way to learn than trying to fight against the machine one-on-one.
Agreed. Absolutely agreed. One other point on that, mate, which I think is important. There's a friend of mine who ran his own project management business for a few years and then got together with another friend of mine and a few other folks, and they founded a business together, quite a big business. He's been working there for 7 years. And every time I talk to him about the business, it's either going to make him billions of dollars or it's going to fall flat in its face. Yeah. And he has a tendency to be a reasonably pessimistic kind of guy. So it's usually going to fall flat in its face, So one of the things that helped him get a little bit more optimistic about it, weird as this might sound, was to catastrophize it. I said to him one day, I was like, okay, so let's assume it all goes to hell in a handbasket tomorrow. What happens? And he goes, I'm screwed. And I'm like, no, you're not screwed. And we talked through, you had this project management business before. You still own all of the domain names and so on. You could turn that back on in a heartbeat. And now you've got 7 years of extra experience at the high end of town that you can put back into that project management business. And after, a half-hour conversation about that, despite the fact that we were talking about what happens if your business goes belly up, he came out of that conversation much, much more optimistic. So one of the things that I like to do is go, right, what if it all went to crap? What would we do then? And use that as a way of realizing, you know what, there's not much that can be thrown your way that you can't deal with. That in itself makes me feel a little bit more optimistic about life in general and work in most cases.
If I can build on that, one end, you've got a post-mortem, right? Where you're reviewing all the crap that went wrong and you're looking for who to blame as quickly as possible. And it can't be your team or you. The alternative way is what you've just described, which is pretty much a pre-mortem. It's the anticipation of what are all the ways this could actually go wrong, all the opportunities we may be able to take advantage of, what happened, and what can we do to mitigate it. I find this by doing that much earlier in the piece, before you've started stuff or before you've invested stuff, it means the risk profile you're feeling and the emotions that come with it are a lot more sane, a lot more reasonable at that point, because you can still have a much more rational argument. Okay, what if the tech fails? What if we can't receive the funding? What if we can't secure the talent? You can rationally work it through. But if you do that at the end of the project or at the end of the work, when suddenly the company's gone bust, it's like it is a very emotionally charged environment. You just don't have the same mental capacity to be able to play. And that's why I love pre-mortems, and I'd strongly encourage people to give it more of a crack. Which brings me on to another uncomfortable topic. Unlearning stuff, Rob.
Oh,
why is unlearning harder than learning new stuff, right? Any tips on letting go?
yes. Don't have a sister who's a psychologist. my beloved sister.
Specific there, Rob. Very specific. Yeah.
My beloved sister is she has a master's in psychology, and I have an interest in psychology because I like to get my head around why people make the decisions they make and so on, which leads to us having very long and very interesting conversations. But occasionally she'll do something that challenges a worldview of mine and destroys me. So I used to be a firm believer in the meritocracy. People rise to the level of their competence, and, society will reward you if you're adding value to society and so on. And I was chatting about something with her, and I mentioned meritocracy, and she went, it's just luck, right? And I was like, what? And she said, there's no such thing as meritocracy. It's just luck. There might be meritocracy within very, very small environments that allow that sort of stuff to work, that are set up to support it. She goes, but mostly it's luck. There has been somebody who has the potential to be the greatest physicist in the world, who's just been born in a slum in Bangladesh and won't ever have an opportunity to explore their potential. And I just went, oh my God, you're right. And I started to think about, we hear about Jeff Bezos starting Amazon in his garage, but he started Amazon in his garage with 300 grand's worth of his parents' money. We hear about people that we focus on the meritocracy, but in fact, they were just really, really lucky. They got a cash injection at the right time, or they were in the right place at the right time, or something along those lines. And I said to my sister, I was like, damn, you've just shaken one of my worldviews right to its core. And she just smiled and went, you're learning. And I was like, oh, that is, I think that dagger in my back belongs to you. You're learning, while my worldview is crumbling. That to me is really, really important, that we have to take our long held beliefs and challenge them a little, Tim Minchin talks about taking your assumptions, your biases, your worldviews, taking them out onto the deck and beating them to death with a cricket bat and seeing what happens, So to me, unlearning often comes from approaching new ways of consuming information. So, go and listen to a different type of podcast to the one that you usually listen to. As long as it's the corporate therapy one, of course. If you watch CNN all the time, turn into Fox News, see what they're saying, yeah, and see if you can get a different understanding of the approaches that they take to the same issue. Take a different way to work. Most of us drive the same way, or take the train or the bus or the ferry or whatever it is. Do something different, consume in a different way. And that can lead you to a position where you go, actually, there might be something in that. So I'm going to go down that rabbit hole and see what I can find. You may come out of that and go, no, I was right. You might do a Principal Skinner on it. Am I out of touch? No, it is the children who are wrong. But the fact that you're consuming things differently, it might shake up your worldview a little bit, and that can be really interesting.
But how as a leader do you spot or identify those habits or those beliefs that may have expired? Like you talked about the cricket bat moment, take them all out there. But is there a clue where, this is probably one I should revisit? What are the signs you're holding on to stuff that's long past its expiry date?
I think, if you take it out and beat it with a cricket bat, like there's a book that I love by a guy called Hertzberg. It's called The Motivation to Work. And it talks about the way people are motivated to do their best works. What is more likely to be a motivator? What is more likely to be a demotivator? Yeah. It was written in 1959. Not that long before I was born, but a fair bit before I was born. And I still love that book because what's in it stands up. I've yet to, and I've gone looking. I've found different takes on motivation, like, Dan Pink's Mastery, Autonomy, and Purpose. Yeah. But even those things, they're just interesting ways of describing stuff that Hertzberg discovered in 1959, So until I come across something that supersedes what I hold on to, I usually won't let it go. Yeah. One of the ways that I do try to let things go is to have either, when you're my age, a really young person in your life who can tell you when you're being a middle-aged old white guy and how we don't think like that anymore, and explore that stuff. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Or have somebody that you can talk with who is very, very, has a very, very different approach to the world than you do, and listen to learn, see if you can find merit in what they're saying rather than just dismissing them because they're looking at it from a different perspective.
What if those views challenge your identity, or your sense of worth? Especially in this day and age where you suddenly got AI coming into the mix, potentially challenging the very world of how you show up at work, where it could be it's replacing whole long lists of tasks or things you enjoy doing. And suddenly you're being asked to say, well, you need to unlearn that old way of doing it because that's far too slow. You may enjoy it, but that's yesterday. What can you do there to sort of get yourself psyched or not psyched? You need to, what's the way through that, Rob?
Yeah, I had this situation a good few years ago now. It's probably 7 or 8 years back with a large bank. And what they were doing was I was dealing with the team that was responsible for things like, credit card applications, home loan applications, and just going through those and checking them all out. And the idea was those tasks were going to be replaced by automation. Now, there were two ways that you could look at that. One way was for you to go, awesome, the automation's taking the job that I used to do, which gives me time to focus on much more interesting stuff. For those folks, we ran them through a customer journey mapping, persona creating, basically a customer experience program, which gave them the opportunity to focus on individuals or demographic groups, etc., and do the more interesting stuff while the automation took care of ticking the boxes on the application, if they were happy to do that. For those that weren't happy to do that, we ran them through a change resilience program, talking through some of the stuff we've been talking through today, things like growth mindset and, resistance to failure and the importance of failure in learning and so on. And a lot of those folks went on to bigger and better things where they just went, you know what, this is not for me anymore. I enjoyed the data entry bit, but I've always wanted to start a yoga studio. So I think now I've got the confidence to go off and do that, So I think you either need to get people to, like, if the change is threatening their identity in some way, you've either got to show them a new identity that they can get behind, or you've got to show them a completely different pathway that they can take and try to give them the confidence to take that. But there are also some that will just go, no, I'm out, I'm done. Yeah. And that's unfortunate, but it is a part of adapting to new technologies. I always think of Hermes, make the most beautiful leather handbags. What most people don't realize is that Hermes used to be a saddlery. Like they used to make saddles and tack for horses. And when people stopped using horses and started using Henry Ford's Model T and everything that came after it, Hermes were left sitting there going, we've got all these awesome leather workers and nobody buys saddles anymore. What are we going to do? I know, designer handbags, anytime a new technology comes along, it's going to threaten some folks. You've either got to get behind that new technology and make it work for you, or take a completely different path. Unfortunately, I still see people who just throw their hands in the air and give up at that point. And they need some love. They need some support to try and find their way out of that little hole.
Well, speaking of giddy up, I feel that's probably the right time to wrap up today's corporate therapy. And as Rob's sisters say, if growth feels awful, congrats, you're learning.
Oh.
Rob, any wise counsel words you'd like to wrap with?
Oh, I don't know how wise they are, mate. But I think, it's important to realize that learning's messy. Yeah. It's often not comfortable, but it's the one thing that keeps you from getting stuck in a hole. Yeah. So if you're a manager or a leader who's stumbling through something, try to lean into the vulnerability rather than the sort of natural reaction we have, which is to hide it, right? Because it's the best invitation for your team to do the same.
Well, thanks for tuning in, folks. Remember to subscribe, share, and join us for more episodes where we get real about the messy stuff in business. Take care. See you next week.
Stay curious, folks.